Welcome to the Criminal Imagination. This series is not a tale of logic and reason. It is a descent into shadows, secrets, and the crimes that refuse to die. We will uncover the forgotten roots of crime fiction, haunted mansions, unreliable confessions, spectral witnesses, and guilty minds fractured by mirrors and blood, and through this we will explore how fear, guilt, madness, and supernatural shaped the genre we believed we understood. This is the archive of the repressed. Welcome to Gothic Evidence Dark Inheritance, a world where justice limps behind secrets, where madness wears a velvet coat, and the blood on the floor tells stories older than law or even time. The house is never just a house. Walls breathe, floors remember, doors whisper, and windows see more than they ought to. Whenever we speak of crime fiction, we rush too quickly to the weapon, the body, the culprit, the confession. Yet, we never see the house as a crime scene. The oldest conspirator in every story is the place itself, the architecture that contains, distorts, and finally outlives the crime. Tonight, we descend into the haunted chambers of domestic space where memory and dread seep into plaster and the crime scene becomes less a location than a living, accusing presence. Consider the house not as a shelter but as an accomplice. In Dambuzzo's Marechera's The House of Hunger, the very structure is infected, seeping rot through its beams and moral corrosion through its tenants. Zimbabwe, fractured by colonial violence and poverty, gives us a building where hunger is not merely physical but spiritual, where claustrophobia and despair crystallize into architectural form. Marechera writes, "The house of hunger was full of noises. There was always someone swearing, someone kicking, someone screaming in bed. The house records each act like a court clerk who despises his duty. Every wall bears testimony and every testimony convicts. Here, crime is not an isolated act, but a contagion, festering within the fabric of space itself. The house is the first and last witness." And then we come to Toni Morrison's Beloved. Few novels show us so ruthlessly how a house can be both prison and grave. 124 Bluestone Road, simply numbered, yet infamous in its terrible intimacy, becomes the stage where memory and guilt build their own architecture. Morrison begins bluntly. 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. That opening line doesn't describe a setting, it accuses. The house itself already knows. We are not invited into a domestic refuge, we are summoned into evidence. This is architecture as prosecution. Haunted site where past crimes cannot be buried because the walls keep exhuming them. What is a murder weapon compared to a staircase that groans with unfinished mourning? What is a knife compared to a house that never lets go of the baby it lost? What links these works is not geography or culture, but a shared understanding. A house is never neutral. Once crime is committed, once guilt is breathed out like smoke, architecture remembers longer than human memory dares to. Haunted houses in literature are not fanciful Gothic ornaments. They are the repositories of evidence no police file can contain. They are the archive of the repressed. Let us think carefully about the Gothic tradition. For centuries, crime and terror did not take place in the streets or the courthouse, but in castles, crypts, manors, estates. Why? because these structures carry bloodlines, inheritances, debts, and curses within their walls. To enter was already to implicate oneself in centuries of unspoken crime. When Marechera drags us through the House of Hunger, when Morrison drags us through 124, they extend this Gothic lineage into modern terrains. The colonial ruin and the African township, the haunted American home born of slavery's unburied death. The Gothic house is crime accomplice because it never lets the past die. And crime, after all, is the refusal of the past to vanish. In Beloved, Sethi murders her child rather than allow her to be dragged back into slavery. The act is horrific, but the house itself holds the aftermath, amplifies it, reshapes it. Morrison writes, it was as though Sethi didn't really want forgiveness given. She wanted it refused, and Beloved helped her out. The house becomes a court where absolution is impossible. Where guilt is both preserved and reanimated. What is 124 Bluestone Road if not a morgue where memory refused to decompose? Every corner is an exhibit in the trial of the past. Marechera's house is different in tone but not in structure. His architecture of dread is less a single haunted mansion than a collective nightmare of collapsing dwellings. Hunger gnaws not only at the body but at the walls, at the very habitability of life. He writes, I got used to the darkness, the smell of urine, obscenity scrawled on the walls. There was always something happening. The crime scene here is perpetual, a rolling catastrophe where violence and decay are routine. The house is not haunted by one ghost, but by a swarm of daily degradations. If Morrison's house mourns a single baby, Marechera's house mourns an entire generation, an entire nation consumed by its own corruption and colonial wound. Notice how both texts feminize the architecture. Morrison insists on matrilineal guilt. A mother's love becomes indistinguishable from murder, and the house bears that guilt like an echo chamber. Marechera's hunger is not just stomach but womb, not just roof but body. Domesticity, supposed to nurture, becomes monstrous. The kitchen, the nursery, the hearth, all becomes crime scenes. They are inverted symbols of care, turned into instruments of accusation. In Gothic crime fiction, the mother is never just a murder. She is the vessel of too much memory. The house is her double, repeating her traumas in plaster and brick. Architecture of dread is not only metaphorical. Think about how readers experience these texts. You do not merely picture rooms, you hear them. You hear stairs creak, taps drip, wind clawing at windows. The house accuses not with words but with sounds and silences. Morrison's house sighs, groans, fills with spite. Marechera's house seethes with shouts, violence, obscenity. Both are noisy trials in which you cannot leave the witness box. The reader is forced to become an unwilling juror. What fascinates me most is how these houses stage temporality. In a courtroom, time is linear. The crime occurred, the evidence is presented, the verdict is rendered. In the haunted house, time folds, repeats, fractures. Sethi is condemned not just once, but every time the house whispers. The House of Hunger does not mark a single act of violence but thousands, each indistinguishable from the next. The Gothic crime scene is never closed. There is no case solved, the case is the house itself, endlessly alive, endlessly accusing. Let us also attend to how guilt inhabits space differently from fear. Fear is immediate, the ghost, the noise, the door that slams. Guilt is recursive, the stain on the wall that won't fade, the floorboard that squeaks under memory. In Beloved, the crime is maternal, the guilt is matrilineal. In Marechera, the crime is political, the guilt is generational. But in both, the house serves as the physical container of the intangible. It is an architecture of dread, and dread is the psychic condition of crime that refuses to die. And is this not the Gothic heart of crime fiction? While modern detective stories prize rationality, evidence, and finality, Gothic crime tales thrive on irresolution. The haunted house is the antithesis of the courtroom. No clean verdict, no clear record, no orderly closure. Instead, the architecture testifies in whispers, and its testimony is corrupted by grief, rage, madness, hunger. In such places, justice cannot be delivered, only memory can. Morrison forces us to confront this when Paul D enters 124. He says, "You got 2 feet, Seti, not 4." He tries to rescue her from being consumed by the house, by guilt, by the haunting. But can one ever walk free of a house that remembers more than you want to? Can one leave a crime scene when the architecture has already incorporated the crime into its structure? In Gothic crime fiction, the answer is no. Escape is an illusion. The house will follow you because the house is inside you. Marechera's narrator similarly dreams of escape, yet remains bound. He imagines flights of freedom, but always returns to the claustrophobia of the dwelling. The architecture becomes psychological, a labyrinth of entrapment where every exit leads back to the same room. Hunger is not only a social condition but a spatial trap. The walls keep eating, the ceiling keeps sagging, the crime keeps repeating. You cannot move out because the house of hunger is also the house of the nation, and there is no alternative dwelling. At this point, it is worth remembering that haunted houses are not built from stone alone. They are built from memory, from trauma, from silence. Every time a mother cannot speak her pain, every time a nation refuses to acknowledge its wound, a new wall is erected, a new room is prepared. Architecture of dread is the architecture of denial. It is not just about what is present in the house, it is about what has been repressed into its very foundations. Marechera and Morrison show us that repression is itself a crime scene, and the house is the evidence locker. This is why I resist seeing haunted houses as cliches. They are not decorative ornaments in Gothic literature. They are indictments. They remind us that crime, whether maternal or colonial, whether singular or generational, are never really past. They survive in architecture, in space, in memory that takes the form of shelter. Morrison teaches us that the dead child will keep knocking until her story is heard. Marechera teaches us that the house of hunger will keep starving its inhabitants until the system that built it is dismantled. Both insist a house is not a shelter, a house is accusation. And so when we think of crime fiction, we must ask, how often do we underestimate the setting? How often do we forget that the real accomplice, the real witness, the real corpse is the house itself? The haunted house is not just a trope, it's a theory of crime. It tells us that guilt is architectural, that memory is spatial, and that the past never lies quietly in the grave when walls remain standing. So I ask you, when you read of haunted mansions, crumbling townships, cursed estates, do you read them as scenery or do you recognize them as the oldest detectives in crime fiction? What stories are your own walls keeping silent? Which rooms in your own memory remain locked, waiting for a knock in the night? I ask you this because every house has a crime it refuses to forget, and every crime leaves a house that waits for you to enter. And so, I bid you bye. Until next time. This has been the Criminal Imagination. Thank you for listening.